Welcome to the Open Door Podcast, your key to exploring the vibrant tapestry of real estate, lifestyle, and community in the greater Boston area.
Join us as we unlock the doors to captivating homes, delve into the essence of local life, and weave through the rich threads of community stories. I'm Melanie Gundersheim.
And I'm Margie Gundersheim, and we're thrilled to be your guides on this journey. Let's swing open the doors to Boston's dynamic landscapes and discover the heart behind the people and the places.
This is the Open Door Podcast,
where homes, lifestyles, and communities converge. Welcome back to the Open Door Podcast. We are so excited to have a special guest today. A friend and a colleague, Stephen Nathanson, an incredible real estate attorney, has agreed to join us and sort of fill us in on the market and how he works and what he's seeing. And Stephen, I just want to thank you so much for being here.
Oh, pleasure is mine. Thank you for inviting me.
I'm thrilled. And I was wondering if you could just give our listeners a little bit of background on your practice and your history and how long you've been in the business.
Sure. So I'm a real estate attorney here in Newton. I've been in Newton for 25 years. My specialty is commercial and residential real estate. I help buyers, sellers, condo purchasers, condo sellers, and commercial acquisition of shopping centers, things of that nature. I'm on the ethics committee for the Real Estate Bar Association. I really think that this is an ethical business, and I take that very, very seriously. That's why I love working with you, because you're one of those favorite ethical people. And I've been sort of a townie. I raised my kids here, and I coached football here, and I like this area. So it's nice to help people in this area.
That's so awesome. And I love working with you because you make my process so easy.
Well, thank you.
And my clients' process really seamless, which is what we want, right, in our transactions. Tell me a little bit about what you're seeing in the market right now.
So I'm seeing a mix. There's no rhyme or reason to it. I'm seeing offers where all the contingencies are present for a mortgage and an inspection, and I'm seeing sellers accept those. I've seen buyers make them. And then on the same day of the week, I might see a deal where there's no mortgage contingency and no inspection contingency. So I can't really gather a flavor right now. I think it's certainly with the inventory, it's a tougher market than it used to be.
That's true.
Buyers are motivated. Buyers are out there. I think they're looking at the rate as just the cost of doing business, and they'll refinance at some point. I think people are not turned off by that because I think the economy is doing well. So I'm seeing a lot of activity. I think the problem is the inventory.
I think it's really hopeful to hear that you have some purchase and sale agreements on your desk that have inspection contingencies and mortgage contingencies, because there's so many buyers that feel that they're boxed out before they even start. And just having that information, I think, is great. And, it doesn't mean you have to necessarily waive all of that. As Mel and I were explaining in a prior podcast, everything in real estate is case by case, transaction by transaction, and there's no cookie cutter approach to anything.
That is probably the most perfect statement I've heard this week.
Yeah. So I'm really glad to hear that you're seeing some of that. That's really awesome. So as far as working with sellers agents and buyer agents, how do you work with them and collaborate? And what does it look like for people who might not be realtors or have never bought or sold before? They don't really understand how all of us work together or the roles. So can you just talk a little bit about how you work with seller and buyer agents?
Sure. I think collaboration is the operative word. It really is a team effort. I think a lot of people have an image that the offer gets written up and then the broker is sort of sidelined. That's not my attitude or take on it. As you know from our deals, I like collaborating. I like picking up the phone. Too many people don't even get on the phone anymore. And you can just get information quickly that way instead of waiting 5 hours perhaps for someone to get back to you on an email. This stuff moves pretty fast. And so I still think there's an old-fashioned way of doing things. But in terms of my ways of collaborating with agents, it's important for me to keep you in the loop relative to the communications. And so if it's a confidential communication, which most of the ones with my clients on the contract would not be, I like to include you or the broker that's involved, and I copy them on the purchase and sale. I summarize the purchase and sale with a memo And the reality is you're going to see things I may not have known about because I've not been on the ground at the property. So you might catch an appliance that was not included or something else that was excluded. There really is a need for that collaboration. I don't like sidelining people. I think it doesn't work.
I always appreciate that so much when we're working together, because there are attorneys that the moment, the deal comes together, but we're going toward purchase and sale, all of a sudden I have no communication about anything, and I have no idea what's going on. And my clients will say to me, "Did you know this or did you know that?" And I said, "Well, the attorney didn't include me, so I didn't know that." And sometimes those are big things, that I should know about.
I'd like to avoid those kind of things.
Right. So it really is helpful that you keep me in the loop. And I think that what's wonderful is that we all can be cross-checking each other, because there are so many details, and even a small thing like this one's come up before, a freezer being removed in the basement prior to close. And the buyer thinks that it was included, and then all of a sudden the seller, decides that it isn't. And it was, we have to refer back to the offer. And if it wasn't discussed, we have to talk about it, and just little things like that. But that can mess up a closing.
Those are unnecessary headaches that are totally avoidable.
Exactly.
I like saying that if it's $100,000 condo, if there's such a thing anymore, if there's a $100,000 condo or a $5 million home, it's the same set of nerves.
It is.
It's the same anxiety.
So true.
And we have to wear hats where you're an agent, I'm an attorney, but we're also psychologists, we're sociologists, we're counselors and handholders.
Yes.
Lack of collaboration just increases that anxiety.
Right.
No need for it.
Right. That's so great. When you're working with sellers, what are they most surprised about at the end of a transaction or during a transaction that they might not have known about? Because so many people that I work with, and probably that you work with too, have not sold a house in many, many years. And they think that they know what the process is going to be, but then when they're in it, all of a sudden they're overwhelmed.
That's a great question.
You and I both work so hard to keep people educated so they aren't overwhelmed, but sometimes it still happens.
So I think the biggest surprise for people, and I think you have to deal with this more than I do, is how you pack up 20 to 30 years of memories and personal property. I mean, it can be very overwhelming. You're dealing with that more on the ground than I am, because you're seeing them more, and you're seeing the piles of stuff that perhaps people have accrued over a period of time. My favorite discussion with seller clients is, I saved all my kids' trophies. How come they don't want them?
Right.
When they asked them years ago, should I throw them away? Absolutely, you can't throw those away. And then when you want your kids to come and pick them up after all these years, they do not want them whatsoever. So I think the logistics of packing up one's life, I think, is a lot of work, and I think that can be a surprise, and it should be planned out way in advance from putting the property on the market. The other surprise that I try to avoid with clients is something called the transfer stamp tax that most sellers do not know about. And in Massachusetts, as buyers, we pay the sales tax on anything we purchase, whether it's a car, a television, a boat. But in real estate, the seller pays what's called a transfer stamp tax, and it's $4.56 per thousand, which at first glance doesn't sound like a lot. But if you have $1 million home, that's $4,560. So it does net off the closing. It goes to the Department of Revenue at the closing as part of the normal closing process. But I find telling clients that up front alleviates the mental math surprise at the end.
Right.
I don't.
Because that's money.
I would not want to be surprised by that.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
That extra $4,000 I didn't know about, that could be part of my moving cost.
Right.
So for better or worse, I'd rather give them that news up front so that they're prepared and they can look at it that way.
I think it's also smart, in the sense that even if people know about it by listening to this podcast before they ever put their house in the market, you can factor that into your pricing.
Well said.
Because it's a few $1,000 that you're going to have to part with at the end of the day.
Absolutely.
And I've had sellers who, in my lifetime, who have said, I didn't realize that there was such a thing.
Yeah.
So, and I think I learned about it way, way back from you sitting in, on a closing. You're so good at educating all of our clients about all the paperwork and what happens next, and without scaring or overwhelming, because that closing has a big pile of papers.
It does. It's a lot of stuff.
There's a lot of page turning. But that's fantastic.
There's a reason we call it paper pushing.
Right,
Yeah.
right. So one thing that's changed since I started in the business is, at the beginning, when we had closings, buyers and sellers were always in the conference room at the table together. There was hopefully like a bottle of champagne and people were smiling and, buyers and sellers were shaking hands or even hugging after the transaction and wishing the new buyers the best of luck in the new home. And nowadays, nobody goes to the closing. And
feels that way.
Yeah, it does feel that way. I mean, I'm sure there are still people that do, and I occasionally go, if people want me there, but I don't go if there are buyers and sellers both in the same room. I always will accompany my buyers, obviously, but I'm talking about the scenario of buyers and sellers in the same room.
Yep.
So how did that come about, that change where it was supposed to be all this, great positive, ending, and then it became not so much?
It's a great question. Years ago, when we set up our office, we have 2 conference rooms with 8. One is an 8-person conference table, and the other one is a 10-person conference table. That's how many people used to attend. It used to be the buyer and their lawyer, unless it was the bank lawyer as well. It would be the sellers and their lawyer. It would be the agents. Sometimes you would see a lender representative. Everybody would be sitting around that table. Pre-COVID, we started seeing sellers not attend as much because of 2 things. Number one, their schedules. If you're moving the same day, I think it's hard to take that time and get to a closing for 15 or 20 minutes as a seller. The buyers are there for about an hour, literally signing their life away, but the sellers are there for about 10 or 15 minutes signing their documents. So what happened was a lot of sellers started pre-signing documents with their attorneys, and the closing is still one of those areas where you can't e-sign. You can e-sign a purchase and sale, you can e-sign an offer, but banks want original signatures. We are not a state that has allowed that yet. We're probably moving that way, but it hasn't happened yet. So as a result, we started seeing less and less sellers. Seller attorneys used to appear with documents, or they would have a power of attorney and sign a few documents. That doesn't even happen anymore. And then COVID sort of eliminated the majority of that. Now my closings are probably 3 people, me and the 2 buyers, and sometimes you. And for the most part, there's a lot of empty chairs there. I do think there's a little bit of a loss of the human element to that.
Right.
I used to enjoy seeing what I call the handoff. Families that had raised their kids and grown and were now downsizing were excited to sort of sell their house to that next generation that was going to do the same thing. Actually, a while ago, I had a older woman that came, the seller, and I was surprised that she showed up. And she opened up her bag and she took out an 8.5 by 11 frame picture of her late husband that had been in the house with her, and she wanted him at the closing.
Oh,
and
wow.
I thought that was lovely. There was a really nice energy to that.
Yeah.
The buyers were a young couple. She was pregnant. There was a joy to that.
That's really
but we've also had closings where people don't talk to each other.
Yes, and we had one of those.
We had an awful one of those. And
yes, we did.
One of the jokes about having 2 conference rooms. You sometimes have to split people up. And,
right.
In that instance, when the buyer and the seller used to be present, sometimes their egos would get in the way, and the seller maybe didn't leave the place as clean as they were supposed to. That isn't necessarily a good thing either. But I do believe overall there's a little bit of loss to not having people at the table anymore. But I think that's the new norm.
I agree. The situation, as I remember it, was, and this again circles back to a prior episode of our podcast where Melanie and I were talking about how we take note of our buyers who, as a listing agent, of the buyers who come through. And we actually take physical notes, because if a couple comes into the property and one of them really loves it and the other one's like, nope, the kitchen's too dark, I'm not happy here, I would hate this is a step down living room, and then they make the offer. This was a similar situation. So this is what happened.
You and I were talking about, yeah.
So one of the buyers loved it, the other did not. Now, the spouse of the buyer, only one of them had seen it.
That's what I recall.
And we got through all the way to purchase and sale. And he came in, the second spouse, part of the couple, came in after purchase and sale and was not happy with what had been chosen. And our client had lived in his home for many years and was so proud of it and loved it so much and had incredible memories there. And he really wanted to be there, in this, just like this woman that you talked about who brought the picture of her husband. He wanted to be there to, for the handoff. So we were all together And then the buyer sat down, and all of a sudden, the husband, who was not happy with the property, came up with some story about something in the house that was wrong.
Yeah, I don't remember the
And
exact.
they had done an inspection.
Yep.
But he decided that something had changed since the inspection, that he saw a water stain or something that wasn't there before. And this got very heated. And you looked at me and I looked at you and I said, I'm going to take our client to your other conference room. I'll take the seller out. And you looked at me and said, good idea. I'll handle this. And so I took him out and we chatted and I said, everything's going to be okay. He said, are we going to close? Is there a problem? And I said, Stefan's in there. He's going to take care of it. And it's going to be okay. So we sat tight and lo and behold, you came to us and said, we're done.
And that was really because the other attorney was sane. And I think that is half the battle. If people don't use me, I'm not offended, but hire a real estate lawyer. Don't hire someone that's a family friend that does a divorce on a Monday and a litigation matter on a Tuesday.
So true.
This has really become a specialty business. We only, in my area of the office, I only engage in real estate. If someone has an accident, I have a friend that can represent them, but that's not my area of law. The lawyers that do this all the time, they're pragmatic. And they're looking at getting the emotional stuff out of the equation and just looking at the contract and getting things done. And my recollection is that attorney was very helpful in that regard.
That's really nice of you to say that. And, thank goodness we had two high quality professionals in that moment.
I have a short list of those lawyers.
It was a rough moment.
I remember. Yeah.
And I think something else we should talk about is this whole, cybersecurity issue that's going on across the world. I mean, I'm not even going to say country, it's everywhere. And I personally know people who have had problems with this and have lost money in the process of wiring, not my clients and not me professionally, but I know people that have. And I thought I would ask you a little bit about that.
Sure. I have to have a different version of the conversation I'll share with you with seller clients versus buyer clients. But the reality is we are now part of the equation to keep our clients' money safe. And that was not anything we had to worry about years ago as lawyers. Now we have to be sort of on the precipice of creating cyber and wire policies. And so on the seller side, I always tell my seller clients, if the closing lawyer is using a Gmail or an AOL account, you're not getting a wire because they've either been hacked and they don't know it yet or they will get hacked. And if you don't need the money instantly, let's get a check, and the check may take a couple of days to clear, but that's safer. On the buying side, if I have a client that is using a local bank or even an online bank like an Ally Bank or some of these other banks, I go through a really regimented security protocol. So the first thing is I say, if you're dealing with a lender, the lender's never going to ask you for information by regular email. They're going to set up a secure portal connection.
That's a good point.
And you can only send your W-2s and your driver's license through that portal. If you ever get an email that says, hi, I'm working with Margie, I'm working with Stephen, can you send me a copy of your tax return? That's usually a bogus email. And if the loan professional is smart, they're going to say, well, let me know, because if it was one of my people, they shouldn't be working here.
Right.
But more often than not, it's a scam. So I sort of set the tone on that first day that people should be scared enough to pay attention, but not to lose sleep. On the wire part of things, the funds that have to be wired for the closing, there are safe ways to do it. Number one, after I have that conversation with a client and they know my voice, I explain I'm the only one that will ever talk to you about funds. We'll never talk about it on email. Anybody that sends you an email regarding funds, consider it a bogus email. Mm-hmm. The second thing I do is I explain, look, when it is time to wire money, I'm going to get on the phone with you and I'm going to send you an encrypted email while we're talking. You're going to open that encrypted email while we're on the phone, and then we're going to verbally confirm those wire instructions. And so that way you're not talking to a receptionist, you're not talking to a paralegal. I'm the person that's sort of point control from the beginning to the end. I think the technology is shifting towards a sort of an encompassed closed chain that'll have like an app. I know some people that are doing that type of stuff now, and it's growing, where you have an app with a password and you get into whatever level of the closing you're supposed to be participating in.
Interesting.
I think that's going to be the next thing. But it really is important these days to be aware and not be in a hurry. I I had a client that I went through these 2 steps with, and he got a bogus email.
He did.
Oh yeah, he had a Hotmail account and did not know that he had been hacked months earlier. They had run up fake credit cards in his name. They had his driver's license, all kinds of things that he was sharing. And he had information from the bank relative to the purchase, so they were sort of paying attention. The bad guys loom, this business that we talk about in terms of wire fraud. The FBI estimates that it's a multi-billion-dollar business with less of a 20% recovery.
Wow.
The bad guys will aim to do this stuff on a weekend, like a holiday weekend, so they gain an extra day on the Monday, so it has time to ripen in their account. We're now using a product called Certified. When we send out money, they do a background check on the individual. They check the devices. They're very, very, and their insurance is on the hook for it. So it's a nice product that's been put together. But he got this email, and he forgot step number 1. And I had said step number 1 is it's going to be encrypted. And he got a regular email, and he printed it out with the instructions, and he got in the car to go to a local bank. And he luckily remembered step 2. And he called me and he said, hey, I'm on my way to the bank. Can we verify the wire instructions? And I said, we haven't sent you wire instructions. Please pull over and change your email password. I think you've been hacked. And as the thing unfolded, it turned out that that's what had happened.
Wow.
So he was this close to wiring $1.2 million to the wrong people. Yeah. So the protocol is important, but you still have to participate in that protocol. So thankfully, with the 2 steps, he at least remembered the important one.
Yeah. I'm so glad he remembered step number 2.
Very, very scary. And the question someone asked me, well, how did they know the number? This $1.2 million.
Yes. How did they?
Well, they had access to his loan application.
Oh, right.
And the good faith estimate from the bank because they had hacked his email. So the number did not seem off from his deal. It seemed like a normal thing to do a week before the closing.
Wow.
But the emails were, you've got to send it now. Let us know when you've sent it. They start hounding the individual.
Pressuring. Yeah.
There's no reason to pressure. Just be calm.
Wow.
So make sure they're dealing with, make sure clients are dealing with a lawyer that has a wire and cyber protocol.
Right.
And that can talk about this stuff from day one.
So important. And many of the, attorneys are excellent that have been around for many, many, many years, but they may not have kept up with technology.
Agreed.
And so, that is a problem.
Yeah, we pay a lot of money for cyber insurance and for other protocols relative to our tech. And it's changing all the time. We do educational stuff in the office. We try to trip our people up on occasion with fake emails to see if they'll fall for it or not. And then we do a module from a learning program that our IT people have on what that was about. But it is an ever-changing thing. It's stuff I never knew about 5 years ago.
Right, even 5 years ago.
Yeah.
That's incredible. And, I understand why you get on the phone with people, to do the review the instructions directly, but I did want to circle back to what we talked about before. And I do love that you pick up the phone. And I think that in general, if aside from, taking wire instructions, which everyone should pick up the phone, we are in a world of texting and emailing, but I do feel that having the conversation is so much more effective so many times.
It's human.
And solves problems much faster. And you also don't have to guess what's behind the text or the email, what the feelings or the thoughts or the motivation is. So that's another reason why working with you is so great.
Thank you.
Yeah.
I feel the same way about you. I can share that I had a situation a couple of weeks ago where the mortgage due date was a Friday. My client was the buyer, and they needed till Monday. The person that was supposed to sign the mortgage commitment from the lender was out that day. It was a small local bank. And I have a general letter that I send to extend a mortgage, but I wanted to pick up the phone and call the other attorney and say, look, they've been approved. There was no issue here. I just can't find the human being to sign the letter. That went further to get the seller's weekend to be calm than if I had just send the letter.
And that's life-changing.
It is huge.
For
and
sellers.
It's a tiny little thing.
Yeah.
It's lost in a lot of businesses these days, but I'm glad that it's important.
It's fantastic. Wonderful. So I wanted to shift gears for a minute before we wrap up, unless there's anything else that you wanted to talk about.
No, this is you be my tour guide. This is great.
I wanted to talk a little bit about your foundation that you started years ago, and I think people should know about it.
Well, you're very kind. I did not know that was going to be one of our topics, but I'm very flattered. So I created a charity back in 2006 that's called the Room to Dream Foundation. And it's essentially mini extreme makeovers for the bedrooms of kids that have chronic illnesses. And so we work with Children's Hospital and Dana-Farber and Mass General, and they will nominate the families based on economic need and what's going on with the chronic nature of the illness. We deal with kids that have cerebral palsy, cancer, HIV, anything that's chronic in nature. And it really went from a tiny idea in 2006 to a giant program now where we have corporate funding from Shama Design and Construction, and we're doing actually a project the weekend of April 13th in Lynn, Massachusetts for a young boy and his sister. One of the things we're very proud of is we always do the siblings. So if there's 4 kids,
amazing.
Yeah, that's been one of the really enjoyable parts because they're usually sidelined and not ignored, but the medical visits take up an enormous amount of time for the family. So it's an equalizer in our eyes to do that. So that's been fun, and it keeps me grounded from being a lawyer.
I think it's so beautiful what you do and helping all these families. And on some of your projects, I've noticed that you even have, professional organizers and people go in to try to help the parents, even in the home, just to get things more organized and maybe be able to live in the space, more efficiently or, with more calm or whatever it is. And you just have so many different angles.
There's our general mission is confined to the bedrooms of the kids, but on a case-by-case basis, if we see families that are overwhelmed, and a lot of them are, with these illnesses, they are remarkably overwhelmed. We do have some of those resources to come in and sort of help them get organized. My job is to say no, right, as the chairman. So sometimes I'll have a mother that will say, "Oh, what about the living room?" And I have to say, unfortunately, our mission doesn't allow the living room.
Right.
But if you need help getting organized with all this medical equipment and medical supplies, we have someone that can come in and help you with that. So
and that's really
that works
nice.
well. Yeah, California Closets donates the closets. That alone is a life-changing thing for families.
Right.
Sherwin-Williams donates all the paint. They're great. We have a guy locally that I can't name because he's anonymous, but he donates a computer and printer for every single project that we do for the kids.
That's
a lot of them are spending a lot of time at home for schoolwork. So there's some good people out there.
Love it. Well, you're one of them.
Thank you.
I'm so grateful that you came and talked to our audience about these little nuts and bolts of real estate and the transaction and what, what's helpful and what to avoid and how to approach things. And I just thank you so much for coming today.
No, I'm glad you did this. Thanks for inviting me. It was a pleasure.
It's my pleasure. Well, thank you all for joining us, and we look forward to seeing you on the next episode of the Open Door podcast.
And that's a wrap on today's adventure with the Open Door podcast. Thank you for letting us share the beauty of Boston and our communities with you. If any of these stories or information has resonated, please subscribe to our podcast on YouTube, Spotify, or wherever you may listen, and join us on Instagram for a daily dose of valuable information and warmth. From Melanie and Margie Gundersheim, a huge thank you for spending your time with us here. Until next time.